Okay, so we are on 12D, the fee waiver policy for eligible developments. I don't think there are any more questions or any more questions for staff on this. Seeing none, would somebody like to make a motion? Councilor Craddock. Recommendation is that council approves the fee waiver policy for eligible developments as presented. Or otherwise, is that your motion?
Yes.
Seconder, Councilor Noble, any opposed? Motion carries. Sir,
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
now we're on 13A, we're on bylaws. We are looking at 13A1, which is the Village of Pemberton 2022 to 2026 5-year financial plan bylaw number 926. Mr. Skora. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for having me. Does everyone want to follow along with the agenda package? It's a pretty dense package. I could guide you along as well. What's everyone's preference today?
I'm good on here, and the public would like to see the 5 years on the screen.
Okay, let me bring it up. Excited about this basketball courts too, though I'm not as tall as the planners.
That means you have the height advantage, Thomas. You know how long it takes for the signal to get from here to here when you're 6'6"? I could do a lot of damage in that time.
Excellent. What's the best method to share this now?
Go to share screen?
Yeah, please. We'll just be through the Zoom and promoting that.
Oh, you're not in Zoom.
No.
Haven't you lost your connection?
Thanks for everyone's patience.
No worries.
Would it be easier for me to do that, or?
Yeah, do you want to just bring up the agenda and that you can scroll through it for Thomas, that might be easier.
I need to share my screen.
Or I can do it. I've got it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
It's page 34. You want to?
Thanks very much. So the purpose of today's, well, I'll start with the report to council where I've outlined the purpose of today. Today I'd like to present to council the 2022 to 2026 5-year financial plan bylaw, number 96, the Village of Pemberton annual tax rates bylaw, number 927, the Village of Pemberton sanitary sewer system regulation connection rates amendment bylaw, number 928, and the Village of Pemberton water regulation connection rates bylaw, number 232, 1989 amendment bylaw number 929. That one's a big one. And those are all for first, second, and third readings. As you may recall, we last discussed the 5-year financial plan on April 5th. We went through a number of the details, key assumptions in the 5-year plan, and refreshed the details, including the $150,000 EV chargers to include those going forward. So we went into depth into that discussion. So I've reflected the changes, the end of year-end adjustments, and there's nothing materially significant in terms of change to cash items. We present a balanced budget, as you'd see in the report here. We'll also be going through in these bylaws, the utility rates bylaws, where I've reflected a $40,000 sewer reserve adjustment in the rates. You'll see that is outlined in the schedule there. The water rates amendment bylaw number 929 has an update to 2022 in the Schedule A, but nothing material in terms of year-over-year rates or changes. So we'll be presenting both of those for first, second, and third readings. And in that, I've highlighted in the report as well, in the bylaw details that take into account the Community Climate Action Plan in future or subsequent sessions. We'd like to review that as we discussed last time. So I guess in terms of procedure here, Acting CEO Fraser, could you help me out whether I present the recommendations first and then navigate each of the individual bylaws, or provide a little more color around some of the notes and details and how we proceed that way?
Well, I think the recommendations are obviously to give for second and third reading to these bylaws. If council would prefer to go through each one of them. If you've got questions, we'd start with the 5-year financial plan, and Mr. Sikora can provide comments and response. And if council wish to look at doing first, second, third reading after that, or if you want to wait till the very end, it might be easier to do them.
Yeah, let's do
by
one. Let's do them one by one.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess we'll start then on the bylaw number 626, which is outlined starting on page 36 of your package. And I've presented on page 37, the 5-year financial plan, which you'll have had a chance to review and is substantially similar to the April 5th session. I've highlighted policy disclosures. I've highlighted, including a breakdown of revenue sources. I've highlighted the regulated rates and just some evidence there that we've met those thresholds. But I've highlighted also the permissive tax exemptions here. But I would highlight some of the notes here. I could go over some of the major assumptions or remind you of those which our budget is predicated around. So I'd highlight that, as you may recall, the municipal tax revenues are increased by 5% in 2022, with 3% allocated to capital and 2% to operating reserves. Non-market change has gone up slightly after the year-end adjustments. So from just over 29,000 to 42,526. So that's favorable for the village. And the average change in assessment value of 24.82%, with just under 22% of that coming from market change. I would highlight that the last point on the general assumptions, that user fees for sewer have a $40,000 increase to reserves, and that's reflected in the schedule. You may note that the rates as we see going forward are substantially similar, but by coincidence, I can assure you that there's rigor and thoroughness and evaluation in those numbers. So that is reflected and would be a material change from last year, if you recall as well. In 2022 through 2026 assumptions, the second point here, as we've discussed at length, we are continuing to see pressure with inflation. We're seeing rising CPI pressures in the market and basket of goods that, of course, make that up. The assumptions for the budget do still reflect that 3.9% increase, which was recommended early on in this budget process for 2022, and it tapers off with a 3% increase assumed in 2023 and down to 2% in years subsequent through 2026. I've tried to hold that set of assumptions through the majority of our line items in the budget, with the exception being some adjustments for the obligations such as the union and their contract. But that is in line with what we're seeing a lot of recognized economists forecast. We don't have a crystal ball. However, it's my view that we're reflecting a reasonable approach to the pressures from inflation and what we might expect over the next 5 years. As I mentioned, the last point on this page here is that detailed costing of the Community Climate Action Plan objectives will be introduced and reflected in more depth in the 23 through 27 5-year plan, which would coincide with the recommendation to have a dedicated role in place to quarterback that plan. Not to say that we aren't already including some initiatives, EV chargers, so on and so forth. Lastly, in these notes here, I would just draw your attention to the capital expenditures. This will be familiar to you from our previous reviews of the capital 5-year plan, and I've tried to lay it out so it's very straightforward and organized by department for your review. But that would be bylaw number 926 for 2022 through 2026 5-year plan. Questions?
John, any questions? Go ahead.
Okay, on page 37, it says 2023 and then the deficit of $800,000, and then below that, adjustments required to balance financial plan. Can you just provide a summary of how that's carried out?
Yeah, so we would have non-cash items which are reflected in the budget. So what you're seeing essentially upstairs, and make the screen a little smaller here. The balance of revenues and expenditures here is where we would end up with essentially our funding before the non-cash items. So there's an element of timing here. There's an element of grant funding, which materially impacts the number that you see. I think you see the swings there. Think about larger projects such as the soccer fields, large $4.2 million projects, which have year-over-year impacts. The balance of some of the capital expenditures, as you see below, would be the bigger offsets, but this does take into account the transfers from statutory reserves, transfers to and from rather, and non-statutory, and the balance of all those essentially accounts are how we arrive at a financial plan balance. I don't want to take you on too much of a detour if I'm going down the wrong path, but does that answer your question, or perhaps I should be more specific or more pointed?
No, that you have an answer at all is pretty good. I guess that we had these discussions in the past about how the carryover amount is getting smaller over time. And is that influencing this?
I mean, I think that without pinpointing exactly which carryover or surplus carry forward, because we've got restrictions on some of the accounts, I would say have to have that discussion at each level. But I would say, as we've discussed in past, the need to increase reserves to continue to fund future operations and to be thoughtful about how that's being done with a larger demand for some of the capital infrastructure, maintaining assets, reserves, so on and so forth. I think that is influencing that. We've continued to be, like the direction's been made to be more thoughtful about increasing reserves balances, for example, to sewer. So to that degree, I would say yes, like it is influencing it. I would point out, like, you know, in congruence with a larger capital plan, you do see in capital expenditures, there's larger provisions for the water treatment plant, you know, things that are very critical infrastructure. And that would influence it as well to fund that and to provide some assumptions that there will be a mixed funding model to achieve that. It certainly influences it as well. I would also highlight that per the strategic objectives laid out by council, we're in the middle right now of the capital asset review project. So we're making great progress with the consultants there, and they'll provide recommendations that further support the plan going forward. So they make some recommendations that I think will help influence that as well.
Any questions? Seeing none, would somebody like to move first, second, and third reading of 2022-2026 5-year financial bylaw number 926? By Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Craddock. Any further discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Bylaw 927.
Thank you. Bylaw number 927. This is a bylaw for levying of annual tax rates for municipal regional district and Sea to Sky Regional Hospital District for purposes for the year 2022. So I'd like to first bring it up on the screen so everyone knows what we're talking about. Here we go. Essentially, I'd like to draw everyone's attention to Schedule A here, which highlights the general municipal, including reserves and CEF, the regional district, and the Sea to Sky Regional Hospital District. I've outlined the rates here, and I would, unless there are any questions, recommend that procedure, I guess, would be that I recommend that council give first, second, and third readings to the rates that I've set forward in this bylaw.
Any questions? Would like to make that motion? Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Zant. Discussion. Any opposed? Carries. 928.
On to 928. This is a bylaw to amend the Village Pemberton sewer rates. Number 899 from 2021. So it's bylaw number 928 from 2022. As I mentioned earlier, the material difference here would be amending the $40,000 increase to reserves. So that's reflected and reviewed in detail in 2022's numbers as presented here. So it'd be my recommendation that council give first, second, and third readings.
Questions? Mover, Craddock, second by Councillor Antonelli. Further discussion? Any opposed? Yes. Tonight.
And then last of this package today would be bylaw number 929 for 2022, which is a bylaw to amend the Village of Pemberton water rates, number 900 from 2021. So you'll see here that we've amended in Schedule A to reflect the rates for 2022. And it would be my recommendation that council give first, second, and third readings.
Questions? Mover,
I'll move it.
Suzanne, second by Councillor Noble. Any discussion? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Scott.
Thank you. You said the counting had to be dry. Thank you very much.
Actually threw a joke in between each one. Okay.
13A5, we're on Village of Pemberton Development Cost Charge bylaw number 723, and we'll bring Mr. Chalmers back in.
Councillor Zant.
Okay. No, he's good. Welcome back, Mr. Chalmers. We're ready for you to take us through the bylaw amendment here, 723.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, council again. The purpose of this bylaw, bylaw 930 to 2022, is to propose an amendment to the development cost charge bylaw that would enable exemptions and reductions of development cost charges for affordable housing projects. Under the Local Government Act, there's some specific criteria under which council can look at varying or providing exemptions or waivers to development cost charges. Affordable housing is certainly one of the more customary ones and is one that we're hoping to introduce tonight. Just in terms of background, council will recall that the development cost charge bylaw is under a general review. And at various times, we've looked at how the affordable housing strategy or action of allowing for waivers and reductions of development cost charges for affordable projects would integrate with the overall development cost charge review. The DCC review generally is progressing, as I understand, but not at a rate that will enable the amendment to allow for reductions in waivers for affordable housing to be accommodated in time for some building permits, which are anticipated for affordable housing projects. Council is probably aware there's been a recent development permit approval for a purpose-built rental building, and we're hoping to have some of the incentives outlined in the action plan for affordable housing in place by the time of building permit issuance for that particular project. So as I mentioned, it's section 563 of the Local Government Act that gives council the authority to do this. There are some other waivers and reductions that council will likely look at in the context of the overall DCC review. But what the act says is that council has the authority to establish developments that are eligible for waivers or reductions to development cost charges. Just for clarity, the act does limit it to rental projects. And so what we've done in the proposed bylaw is effectively created two new classes of affordable housing. And these will look familiar. You saw them a few minutes ago in the fee proposal, but there will be eligible development for profit and eligible development not for profit. The distinction between these two is the for-profit development would be for purpose-built market rental housing without rent restrictions. The eligible development not-for-profit has two subcategories to that. One would be projects which are built by a not-for-profit entity, whether that's a provincial community service club or other agency in partnership with BC Housing or CMHC. And the second class is for anyone, so including private developers, who come forward with projects that propose rent controls in excess of 20 years. The effect of those two different classes is the for-profit. So the market rental buildings would be eligible for a 25% reduction in the development cost charges that would be otherwise payable. And the not-for-profit would receive an entire waiver. They would be exempted entirely, or DCCs would be waived for that project. In looking at this proposal, we balanced several things. The first was council's expressed desire to find incentives for affordable housing projects. We do realize that they don't materialize magically. There typically does have to be some offset in terms of cost and other things for these projects to make sense and become viable development projects. We tried to balance that with the reality that the district does utilize development cost charges as part of their overall capital planning process and for the delivery of services to the municipality. In context, the village has variable development cost charges. They rise and fall depending on the amount of development that's typically granted either subdivision or building permit in any given year. And we do acknowledge that there is a slight drop in revenue potential for the reserves that are eligible for DCCs. However, a couple things to consider. One is that when the new DCC bylaw is prepared, there will be some accommodation for any of the foregone revenue for affordable housing projects. And on balance, the development cost charge program in the village of Pemberton is relatively small as a function of even though in Pemberton scale, it's a lot of development happening. In terms of the number of units receiving building permit or subdivision, it's a modest amount collected per annum. And the village has significantly below market rates for development cost charges. So although they're important, we think that the next update of the DCC bylaw will be able to accommodate whatever foregone revenue is lost through the development cost charge program over time. Just want to mention the incentive-based approach. Again, this was an important part of council's action plan as part of the affordable housing strategy work done a couple of years ago. looking at incentives that the village can provide to encourage this form of housing or to make it more practical or possible. This exemption and waiver of DCC charges is common in many municipalities that are trying to encourage affordable housing, and I think it's an appropriate approach for the village to undertake now. And then just to conclude, we did touch on this earlier. We are aware that council is interested in longer term arrangements for affordable housing projects on a number of fronts, but we've mentioned already the distinction between the for-profit housing program at 10 years and the not-for-profit at 20 years and the rationale behind that. Again, council will be able to negotiate housing agreements for whatever term they see fit for any project, but I did want to draw again to council's attention that the prohibition on strata titling is a critical tool that council will have to have an active role in determining what affordable and attainable housing looks like in the community over the long term. So that's why we have chosen a slightly a lower threshold than we have discussed in the past about some of the targets for tenure of affordable housing, to acknowledge that particularly in the for-profit, the key restriction in those housing agreements will be the prohibition on strata titling. And that will exist regardless of the term of the housing agreement. So council, after initial occupancy, will have full control over whether a building that's occupied remains as a rental building or can be strata titled and sold as individual units at some point in the future. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I would be just one other highlight of the bylaw in terms of the administration of it. This because the program applies only to buildings and only to rental buildings, the authority to administer the bylaw or to make the determination and to exercise the bylaw would lie with the building official. Development cost charges are typically collected in the building permit process for this type of building. And so it would be the building official's responsibility to determine whether or not a project is eligible and either reduce or waive the fees. As with every delegated authority of council, if there is a dispute arising out of that, there's a right under the act for the applicant to appeal to council for a final determination. So with that, Mr. Mayor, be open to any questions or comments council may have. Thank you.
Thanks, that's great, Mr. Chalmers. And you know, I totally wrapped my head around the strata titling 10-year framework. Not gonna lie, I'm still feeling a little unsure why we wouldn't put the 20 years up to 30 or more. I heard what you said about BC Housing and other agreements there, you know, calling for longer tenures or a lot higher numbers than that, but I'll just leave that comments there. Questions from council? On one? Is that clear? Okay, and then would somebody like to give Village Permanent Development Cost Charge Bylaw 723 amendment bylaw to bylaw 930 first, second, and third reading? Moved by Councillor Noble, second by Councillor Craddock. Any further discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Chalmers. Have a great night. Next up is 13A4, a special council meeting, and this is to accommodate adoption of the bylaws that we just gave first, second, and third to, and that's that we hold a special council meeting on Thursday, May 19th at 9 a.m. for this purpose. Would somebody like to make that motion? Councillor Noble, second by Councillor Antonelli. Any discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Brings us to 13B, it's bylaw for third reading and adoption. Village Permanent Zoning Bylaw 832, Mr. Brown. Good evening, welcome.
What's that? Yeah. Right, so I'll just share my screen here. So I do have what's going to look like very similar presentation to last time. But just in case there's someone from the public who didn't see the last one, we'll go through the amendments that we have proposed. So the main thing here is that these are housekeeping amendments. Most of them are either administrative, they're correcting errors that we've discovered, or they're providing clarifications for different sections of the zoning bylaw. These type of amendments come about through our day-to-day use. Perhaps there's terminology that we're interpreting one way, but we're often finding developers or interpreting another. So many of these will look like it's one word here or there, but in a zoning bylaw, one word here or there can mean a lot. And so part of this is to create efficiency so we don't have a dozen emails going back and forth over a couple of words. So I'll quickly go through. So the first amendment is adding some language in the application section. These are the ways that we enforce our bylaw. We find somebody that's not compliance. Again, fairly administrative, procedural. We've added some definitions. So the difference between a balcony and a deck, it's the type of thing that we encounter that needs clarification. Emergency shelter, something that's needed to specify. And then we get into amendments, again, deleting a word here or there to help with our clarification. As we keep going through, and some of our regulations, again, adding a word here or there, deleting a word to help us when our developers are reading our bylaw. Carriage houses are a theme, bit of a theme here. They're becoming more prominent, especially on our hillside developments. So we're amending some of the wording and things in those sections. And then storage containers, adding the use of those for rural residential areas, but also allowing us to use a few more than the maximum of 2 at the rec site as it develops. And then a quick note on the retaining walls as well. So we're adding it to the regulations, the measuring point from the average or finished grade. So this is where we measure the walls from. It doesn't change anything regarding the maximum height of 1.2 meters. So through parking and loading requirements, again, we're adding, correcting an error in the general requirements, specifying requirements for carriage houses as they become more significant. And then in the design criteria, adding some sections here to align the wording here with what's in the building bylaw that was passed last year. A few amendments to specific zones. We don't, again, it's more clarification, keeping one definition for a secondary suite rather than an accessory. And then for duplex in RTA 1, duplex was added in the previous amendment, but there were no specifications put into the regulations, so we're adding those there as well. I realized when I was here last time, I didn't go over the maps, what those changes are. Again, they're correcting a few errors that only us would ever notice, but also refreshing the color scheme. So this is what the previous bylaw had, right, for the wider shot. So we're adding the texture of the image in the back. So we felt it just gives a little bit more context in this case. And it refreshes the color palette, a little bit bolder colors to help us decipher the different zones. And so then we go to Schedule A1, which is the zoomed in versions of different areas. So this is the previous one. And then the new one, just some bolder colors, amending the labeling. So that we get a more user-friendly and a readable map. And that's it. Yeah, so council did vote to waive the public hearing for tonight because this these amendments are housekeeping in nature. But with that, that does come with requirement for advertising. So this notice was in the last 2 editions of the Peak newspaper. We did allow for the public to contact us with feedback if they wish to do so. To my knowledge, that there's been nothing received. So the recommendation tonight is to go ahead with 3rd reading, then 4th and final reading of zoning bylaw number 832, amendment bylaw 924. And with that, I'll take questions.
Any questions?
I like the new colors on the map. It certainly shows up a lot better.
Okay, would somebody like to move 3rd reading? The zoning amendment. Moved by Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Antonelli. Any discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Would somebody like to move adoption of the bylaw amendment? Moved by Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Noble. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
We're on 13C, we're on bylaws for adoption. First is the OCP amendment for Tayada École de la Vallée 902. We've seen this times, so we don't have a report on this. Did you have any comment? No?
No, just that they have received approval from, the bylaws received approval from Ministry of Transportation. This is what we've been waiting for, and we were very pleased to receive that last week. So we were able to put this on the agenda for 4th and final readings and adoption.
Great.
Quite excited about it.
So I'm looking for somebody to move adoption of Village Permanent OCP Amendment 902, 2021. Moved by Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Craddock. Any discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. And then I'm looking for somebody to move adoption of zoning amendment bylaw 903. Moved by Councillor Zant, seconded by Councillor Noble. Any discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. And then we're on to village permanent election and assent voting bylaw 925. No report here either. We've seen this. Would somebody like to move adoption? I'll move adoption. Councillor Craddock. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you to staff for all of that. Much appreciated. We're on to number 14, which is the mayor's report. A couple items to share. Not chronologically, I'll just kind of tick away here. Attended the LMLGA, Lower Mainland Local Government Association, but I won't steal Councilor Noble's thunder for once and let her discuss these sessions as well. But I did want to speak about our resolutions. I did stand up and speak to the 2 resolutions we brought to the floor. The first being on working with the provincial government to change the funding for policing when communities go over 5,000, as you know, and the second one for volunteer fire departments to be able to recover some of their expenses when dealing with accidents outside the municipality on the highway. Spoke to both got, I think, unanimous support to carry on, and also resulted in some good conversation after. The police one is, especially, I had 3 different mayors come up to me and say, we're at 4,600, we're at 4,800. So there's a lot of concern with other small communities that are flirting with the 5,000 limit and the costs. So as not if, but as we continue to try to advocate for a change in the system, I know there's a lot of support out there in and from other local municipalities. So I think we carry on the fight as long as we can. And yeah, I mean, overall, I thought it was a really good convention. I kind of like the MLGA in some ways over UBCM because it's that much more local. And so the conversations and the networking I find are even more valuable, more local, more relevant. So I enjoyed that aspect. I'll leave the rest of it to Councillor Noble. We were meant to have a PVIS meeting the other day. That didn't happen because there was a power outage in parts of Area C, resulting in some connectivity issues. So that all the items on there were postponed until June, with the exception of the basketball court, which we discussed earlier. Attended the Arts Council AGM. It was nice to hear them speak of their activities, and really looking forward to the Mountain Muse Festival at the end of June, and hopefully that all goes off well. Keep an eye on that. There's a whole series of events from arts to markets to lots of music, so that should be great fun. I attended on May 2nd the Schwelkuntum Community Forest Board meeting. A little bit of discussion around recruiting, but more sort of updates on operations. The bridge crossing at Miller Creek or Miller River, it looks like it'll come in at a budget around $80 to $100,000 and about $30,000 in road work to be done on there. The installation of the bridge for that is planned for August, and the cost will be shared with a local resident and logger in that area. Consultation on the bridge has been completed, and the plan at this point is to remove it after the work's done. Reviewed a little bit of the harvests, recent harvests. So just to remind everybody, 5,000 cubic meters were harvested in the Green River area in 2021. And 5,000 cubic meters were harvested in the Mackenzie Basin area in 2022. Both of these areas will be getting replanted this spring. And the next cuts coming up will be, it's a BH 902, which is at the bottom of Val Ridge Hydro Line area. And that's 1,500 cubic meters starting June 22nd or thereabouts. There's discussion about taking fear about running out of time in the school year, but there's a lot of desire to take up some students from Pemberton Secondary to visit and understand the community forest a little bit better. There was discussion about the community accessing firewood as a means to provide extra value for the community, as well as to make sure there is no waste in our harvesting. The board agreed to renew the membership for the BC Community Forest Association and agreed to sending Clay to the board meeting as well. And there was a debrief on the public information session from a couple of weeks prior, which I think we've discussed a fair bit here, but quick recap. Some of the biggest topics of conversation were just the our forestry practices and the old growth and our approach to old growth. And I'm happy to say that old growth comes up every single meeting, and I'm happy and hopeful that it comes up every single meeting from now on, because we have to be very careful about how we approach it. And along those lines, the community forest is reviewing all of the old growth in our community forest. We're getting quotes to do that work and to really understand all the values of the old growth and the second growth that have potential to become old growth very soon. And there was also talk about, that this is going to be this will be an ongoing conversation with our community in terms of what our forestry practices look like, our ecological approaches, climate change and old growth, and how do we make sure that the public always gets the answers that they need, and talked about updating regularly and FAQ, how that gets distributed amongst the communities. And there was also discussion about how we receive emails from the community and what we do with them, because I think all of us on the board have different people that might contact us. So the importance of taking those correspondences and putting it through our new executive director, and if that person feels they should go to the board, then it goes to the board. But just to make sure that people get consistent and accurate information on our community forest. Attended the St'át'imc Nation gathering a couple times last weekend, I think it was, right? Was it last weekend? Really neat. The weather kind of held out for a good portion of the outdoor stuff. I was there for the opening when a group of runners came in and they'd run from nation to nation, territory to territory within the Stadtlieb territory, and arrived tired, but proud at the end of a very long haul. And so they were welcomed into the gathering, and there was a sort of an opening drum ceremony. That was really cool. And the whole 2-3 days were great. There was bannock making contest, fashion show. I think there was 26 drummers on the Monday night and more on the Tuesday night. A really big drum circle. So really great event. And similar to that, this weekend coming up is the long weekend rodeo on the Mount Currie Rodeo grounds, and their powwow as well. So hopefully we can attend that. And on those notes, I want to wish everybody a great long weekend. That's all I got. Actually, let me make sure, because I always say that's all I got when I come back every single time. Now we'll go with that. Council reports. Councilor Noble.
I attended the Pemberton Arts Council AGM, and I'm really looking forward to the Outside Voices jury session tomorrow. Doesn't sound like we had a lot of applicants, unfortunately, but still, it's a start. And I also attended the LMLGA. Right order, yeah. And one thing that really stood out of that conference to me was one of the first keynote speakers, Charles Montgomery. He's a social engineer. He designs communities to be more friendly. And it was really fascinating and had so much relevance to Pemberton. He talked about co-housing, like what we have coming up. And he's actually designed that, participated in that, and had relevant feedback on how it's helped people through the pandemic and in a lot of other ways, which was super relevant to me with feedback I've had from our community of what's lacking for a lot of our community members. So that was really interesting. And also how simple things like a variance to have street front loading for small businesses can help with the friendlier streets, because the small storefronts are a huge part of that. And so to have the variances where you're allowed to unload in the street front helps facilitate that. And yeah, it was super fascinating. He's got a book he wrote called Happy City. That's Charles Montgomery, if anybody wants to look that up. It's a lot of, way more than what I covered, but so much relevance to what's happening in our community lately too. So yeah, that was the highlight of it for me, for sure.
Awesome, thank you. Any other council reports? Seeing none, we are on to. Go ahead, Councilor Zach.
Thank you. Yeah, along with Mayor Richmond, I attended the PVS meeting today, which we've already covered. So really excited about that new basketball court. Looking forward to that going up. I attended the library committee meeting. Not too much to report there, except that they're starting to look at return to charity events for fundraising for the library now that COVID's the restrictions have been decreased. Ahead of their 2022-23 strategic review, they're going to send Emma's going to send out a survey just to get an idea of what the public is looking for from the library, and that should come out probably September. And the other discussion was around whether to be open or closed during the September 30th. And they were going to speak with Christina Burns about whether the community center was going to be open or not. And that's about it.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, we're on to number 16, correspondence, 16A for action. First one is from Maxine Bruce, Lewa Nation, presenting a request for sponsorship from the 2022 Lewa Nation Rodeo. I know in the past we've done a $500 sponsorship. I will say that I had a casual conversation or two with Maxine and others, and there was a bit of a hope that we can maybe contribute a little bit more. So I'll just throw that out there and open it up for conversation. Sorry, go ahead. Councillor
If I can just
Fagan.
provide a bit of an update, we have $7,500 in the Community Enhancement Fund. Council may recall that we previously had $3,000 allocated to the roundabout administration, which has been removed from that, so we don't take that off. We have, on the other hand, updated the amount that is in the PSS bursary. So we went from 2,000 to 3,000. So if we remove the bursary amount from the fund, we have 4,500 in the Community Enhancement Fund. Traditionally, we have contributed to both the Lilwak Christmas Bureau and the Pemberton Food Bank Christmas Hamper Program. The last number of years, we've given $250 to each of those organizations. And so I just wanted to let council know that we've got 4,500 in the pot, and we do need to help it go around the year with the idea that we do contribute. Staff usually brings a report back sort of in October to ask for council support on the Christmas funds.
I'd like to suggest an $800 donation this year. They haven't had the event in quite a while, so we have had some savings. And I think there's a lot of people really looking forward to it this year more than ever. So I would definitely support increasing it.
Make that motion.
Yes.
For 800.
Seconder.
Yeah, or I'm looking at what we can sponsor here so that we're actually the lead sponsor. And the least expensive one is the Pee Wee barrel racing at $1,000 over 2 days. So I would just,
Round it up.
well, I'm not suggesting we jump up, but the $800 wouldn't give us the lead sponsorship in any of the requests.
Let's jump it up to 1,000 then.
Then if you're doing that, I will second the motion.
Okay.
Okay, further discussion? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
So that's for the Pee Wee barrel. Perfect.
That's fun to watch.
I thought you were in it this.
I am. I'm the barrel.
You're the barrel. Okay, then I'll be the people. Number 2 is from Tourism Pemberton, providing information regarding sponsorship opportunities for the 17th annual Pemberton Golf Tournament and Slow Food Cycle 2022. So let's do one at a time. Did you want to provide a history of the golf tournament?
Well, we have sent a team in the past. I think the last couple of times we've had a hard time getting a full team, but we could just sponsor. From a staff perspective, it's hard to take a day to go. So, but I think council members have attended in the past. Council Craddock, have you've been to this one or to the other one?
I volunteered for the Rotary to do the cooking.
And then for Slow Food Cycle, council will recall that we do provide funding through the community, the Pemberton and District Community and Pemberton and District Initiative Fund, which is facilitated through the SLRD, through the local service area bylaws. We do contribute to Tourism Pemberton, which helps supports this program. And we are at $25,000, I believe, this year. And that is contributed more or less equally between the Village of Pemberton and the Regional District Electoral Area C. That said, they do have a sponsorship program for the Slow Food Cycle, everything from, I think, bronze to double platinum. So if council were interested in supporting Slow Food Cycle independently, there's a community partnership and then right up to platinum title, which has already been taken. So you may want to consider doing a $250 contribution or a $500 or $1,000 for Slow Food Cycle.
Okay, so let's start with the golf tournament. So as the CEO Fraser said, we've been putting a team in. I don't know if we feel we have the capacity to fill a team or we could just do a sponsorship. Is there any interest here at the table to play golf at the tournament? Come on, you're a big golfer, Lee. I know you are. You do a lot of golfing.
My mama once lived on the golf course for a whole week when I was away.
There you go. Okay, how about just consider a sponsorship? And both of these requests would also come out of the CEF.
Yes, correct.
Consideration for sponsorship?
Yeah, I'd suggest a bronze sponsorship for $500.
Second that.
Further discussion?
And I would suggest that it gives one golfer, I guess we just throw it out for staff to maybe have a draw or something if somebody wants to win.
Yeah, we could throw that up. I really wanted to golf.
No, you gotta pay.
Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. And what would council like to do with regards to slow food cycle? Would like to do a sponsorship in addition to our funding?
I think it would be a good thing to do.
Mhm.
Okay, and you meant the 250, 500, what's the will?
250.
250? Oh, auction.
Who'll give me 7? Who'll give-
I kind of think the municipality pays a lot of money to these organizations already,
Mhm.
a lot. So I think, you know, this is a token, not necessarily like we have to support more. So I don't know, I'm good with 250 because there are other people in the community that, you know, we can give the funds to.
I'd support 250.
This event of it.
Too badly.
Okay, so I've got a mover and a seconder for 250. Any further discussion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Correspondence for information, we have 3. Would anybody like to pull any out or move file and receipt?
I'll move receipt.
Seconder. Councilor Noble, any opposed? Motion carries. Decision on late business. Late business, notice of motion. Question period. The regular council meeting is now open for questions from the public. Please be reminded that only questions directly related to items discussed during this meeting are permitted. If any members of the public attending via Zoom webinar wish to ask a question, please click on the raise hand feature in the webinar controls to notify staff, and they will unmute your microphone when it's your turn to speak. Any questions? We're only live gallery member? No? Anybody on Zoom?
Nobody on Zoom.
Nobody?
Oh, there are people there.
Oh, okay.
No. Okay, if there's no questions. I will look for a motion to recess the regular and go back in camera. Moved by Councilor Noble, second by Councilor Zant. Any opposed? Motion carries. Take a couple minutes.